Sure.
Yes.
Okay, it's read by like how many people? It's totally, yeah, I don't know how you.
Okay, so for today, what I'm going to do is talk about decoration spread over 3 different cups. So how to do, yeah, it's good. How to change decoration over same form. Sort of working within a series, which is something that I always do. I always have a setup in my studio almost exactly like this, where I make a bunch of pots and I have my lineup of cups. For me, cups are my sketchbook. They're like the thing that I do the most of. I don't actually have a traditional sketchbook. I have a blog and I have some other things that I do that are sort of idea-based to continue thoughts, but it's really the cups is where I get it down in physical form. So this is a very basic Unomi form. You can see 3 different, slightly different sizes, but generally same proportion, 1/3, 2/3, about the size of a hand, which is good. So I've kind of taken care of all the functional things as the baseline, and then this is my blank canvas. So with this one, I've divided up this cup into 3 different sections, and I'm going to do a dogwood pattern that goes on a diagonal. I'm always drawing from these little photos that I have. You can see them floating around. And I do draw from photos versus drawing from nature or from my own photos that I take. I always take internet photos because I don't want to be too attached to the original image. So I want to have a lot of creative license when I'm working. For most of the stuff I'm doing, I'm referencing fabric in the way that I paint, so I'm stylizing the image in a way that already looks flat. So there are some 3D aspects of what I'm doing in the 2-dimensional drawing, but most of the time what I'm shooting for is those roller block prints, which I showed the other day in the demonstrate or the slide lecture. I think it's interesting when you're painting flowers. They're just everywhere. You know, floral prints are one of the most popular fabrics ever sold historically, but there's also flowers in nature. They're everywhere. So as a painter, I had to figure out how was I going to approach the stylization, because it's not realism. So when you look at this, when I'm putting down my base color, which is white on white, it does not look that similar to this, but it has the gestural movement of this. So if you take this on the diagonal, essentially that's what I'm painting. And I found even though it's as simple as that I'm just painting 5 flowers on a diagonal, if I don't have that, I can tell. Like it doesn't have that little extra kick of realism. So I'm doing 3 patterns that fall down from the top of the cup. These second and third ones I'm going to paint much faster. Whenever I do workshops, I'm always feel a bit sorry when I get to this point because it's the slow part. When I'm throwing, it's like fun and exciting, and there's like shapes coming and things are changing. And then when I get to the decoration, it's sort of an internal process. So I'm going to speed through here. Now I'm using just basic underglazes. For a long time I used slips because I looked at English slipware, so I thought, might as well do what they did. And at some point it just clicked in my head. Actually, it was when I was in China and underglazes were so cheap. There's this company called the Chrysanthos Company, and they make nice underglazes that are like $8 a bottle for this, maybe even cheaper. And I just decided that it would be much better. Also like the intensity and color, and that they've already added suspenders into these, so they're nice and fluid, easy to paint. So you can see I'm doing almost exactly the same pattern. I'm not getting too caught up in what the individual flowers look like. It's more about that overall gesture of the line as you follow from the top rim down.
And your slip is just a white slip, doesn't have any...
Mm-hmm. It does have a little bit of an opacifier in it. It's got, I think, 6.5% Zercopax, because I'm using a very standard earthenware, and there's so much iron in the earthenware that if I don't put a little bit of opacifier, you get too much running, or you see too much running. So when you look at this, do you see these like drips coming down? I want you to be able to see that there's 2 layers going on there. So if there's no opacifier, the whole thing bleeds out and you can't see it at all. But if there's a little opacifier, it tends to work a lot better. So now I'm going to go in with the yellow and do the middle section. It was really interesting the other day to see the dogwood you were doing, the big one, and to see how you were handling the form, because it became such about symmetry, between the three-dimensional form. In mine, I don't ever make it that regimented, but I want to get on the computer and try to design some pots in the way you design your big murals, and then see how I can work off of that. Because I like that tessellated, that idea of tessellation where it rotates.
Yeah, that was the reason it's so symmetrical is because it needed to look right no matter how you rotated it.
Right.
Sometimes it looks really nice when it's asymmetrical from one angle, and then you turn it upside down and it looks awkward. So I kind of had to regulate it.
Yeah, and that symmetry asymmetry thing. If you look at Islamic tile, do you like any of the temples in Istanbul? Have you ever looked at any of the tile work, the Iznik tile work?
Only in pictures.
It's unbelievable. I haven't been there in person, but it is unbelievable to see the complexity that they can build with relatively simple patterns that were just repeated turn, repeated turn. It's really pretty interesting. So now when I'm going in with the green here, the green doesn't follow the pattern. So one of the things I learned early on is that this is what I call the Thelonious Monk theory, which is that if you play some rhythm in music, or if you play some visual rhythm, if you go off the rhythm, so like a piano player is playing one with his right, one with his left, if you go off the rhythm, you'll keep the viewer's notice, like you'll keep their attention way more than if it's the exact same rhythm every time. And I think that's the difference between jazz and classical, and why I like jazz a lot more than I like classical. So visually, I want this pattern to change. There has to be enough similarity that your eye is trying to figure out the puzzle. So like when I'm decorating, I'm often thinking about in nature things that slightly shift. So if you guys have ever noticed when you're walking down a sidewalk and you're looking down, if there's one brick that's a little bit out of the pattern, you instantly find it. And it's about us being in nature and trying to find our predators, things that are trying to go after us. So we have to be able to tell change. So when you look at this, even though this is exactly the same pattern in the overall feeling, it's changing just a little bit each time that I do that. So now I'm going to go in and do the sgraffito around. So I've got lots of sgraffito tools, whether it's a small, just like a pen tool. This is just a little carving tool. And what I'm trying to do is to create a little bit of an illusion of depth. And I'm going to do that by having the flowers be a thicker line than the leaves, than the petals, like the green parts. So at this point, that's when the form is defined. And I really got to be interested early on, before I was ever a potter. I saw Andy Warhol's prints. And the ones that I liked the best were when he would misprint. Like when everything shifts just a little bit. And I like that about this sgraffito over top of the painting, is that it doesn't quite line up. There are a few artists that do that really well. Like if you guys know Catherine Finnerty's work, does anyone know Catherine Finnerty's work? I really like that about her. She'll have a drawing in the background and then glaze over top. And as it's firing, the glaze goes down. So there's a slight disconnect between the color and the individual articulation of the lines. So I'm just going to do one panel of this and then move on to the other cups. I think spending so much time as a younger artist trying to avoid painting and drawing is one of the great ironies. Like I remember when I was maybe 15, I decided I was going to be a potter. I was just one of those people that got on the wheel the first time and totally got sucked in, and I was drawn in, and that's all I wanted to do. So when I went to college, people like my painting teachers were like, "Oh, you got to spend more time in the painting studio. It'll make your pots better." And of course, being younger and arrogant, I was like, "Nah, I don't need this crap." And a prophecy was made. My teacher said, "Watch, in 5 years, you're going to be painting on pots." And it's much longer than 5 years later, but I definitely owe much more to that man than I originally would have thought. So you can see when I do this, that articulates all the forms. And again, it's the sum of all the parts that gives the gestural energy. It's no one flower, because when I'm looking at the flower, and it can be any form. It could be a geometric form. It could be anything. It's the way that all these work together. So now, when we contrast this versus another one of these, this is same form, same articulation on the bottom, but a very different approach to space. So this way, this positive form is the gestural part. You're seeing your eye travel down through here. This, it's the negative space that's the gestural form. So you can see here your eye wants to fill in these gaps. So it's working two different ways on exactly the same form. This third one here is very similar in composition to this one. But you can see here that this is done, it's monochromatic for one, but it's also a quick slip drawing. So I'm dunking it in the slip, and then I'm taking this right here, and I'm drawing into it. So this is like the quickest thing to a charcoal sketch that I have in my own work. Like, it's a one-shot deal. If you don't get it right, or if I don't get it right, then I could scrape it off and start again, or just that's the way it is. And I like the immediacy of that. And like there's a freshness here to this little section that to me looks better than this. I shouldn't say it looks better. It looks very different. The articulation and the actual petals is, or the leaves is so different between the two. So that was the end of the demo.
Yay.